Fox Business headline, Kamala Harris's campaign website has no economic plans. We were just going through it again through the commercial break. It's a bio about her, and it's a bio about her. There is no tab for issues.
It's intentional. She has no intention of putting any policy out there until this convention's over. I'm a very fortunate guy because I'm an investor, and for decades I've been syndicating debt, primarily for real estate. Some of her closest advisors are people I work with in finance. And we're friends. So I call them up and say, hey, listen, you want to talk about policy here? And they said, listen, everything's working right now. We're going to strong-arm the press on policy. We don't need to do anything.
Wait. What's everything's working?
The momentum's crazy. The press she's getting right now, she's sucking.
Her campaign.
The campaign.
Okay.
The campaign is working.
Donald Trump supporter Kevin O'Leary is apparently a Kamala Harris insider that has conversations with his rich friends who are advisors to her campaign. And they were eager to tell him this story that he probably just made up.
Okay.
And there's no reason to sit down with any journalist and talk policy right now because we're in the euphoric stage. They think they can raise up to $300 million before this this whole thing that's going to happen over the weekend is over. So that's extraordinary amount of money. Then it's time to talk policy. Then it's time to go to the center. Then it's time to talk about border.
All right. So are they telling you where she stands?
No. They're just saying, listen, we don't worry about this right now. We don't have a problem. No problem here, Houston. We're just raising dough.
Sounds like O'Leary is worried about the record-breaking fundraising numbers that the Harris campaign is touting. So he's looking to bring attention to her economic plan that's still taking shape. He seems to be hoping to disparage it so that voters will focus on that rather than this highly detailed plan from Trump.
So there are some of the most brilliant people on Wall Street that are saying that if President Trump doesn't win, you're going to have a depression. I happen to agree. I think that's true. Because I know how bad these people are. You know, they like to say that they did this and that. You saw the $7 trillion that they said it was me for $7 trillion. It wasn't me. It was them. They said that I had inflation. They took over 9% inflation. No, I had 1% inflation. I had actually no inflation because if you look at the categories, we had just about no inflation. But I had a very minor, I actually had a positive inflation. It was a perfect number because you don't want zero. I mean, I'm not going to give you a whole course on economics, but you don't want zero. 1%, 1.4% is great. You want a little bit because you don't want to have deflation. Deflation is in many ways even worse. I had a perfect number right around the 1% number. It was perfect. And to show you, it stayed there for 2 years. And then he did all of the different borrowings that he did. And then he did so many things wrong. Every time he would do it, I'd say, big mistake. And don't forget, they sell hats and they sell stories. Trump was right about everything. I've been right about a lot.
Everything was perfect. The perfect phone call when he was trying to illegally lean on election officials in Georgia. The perfect response to COVID when over 350,000 people died of it while he was president. And now the perfect economy and inflation rates. You'd know that if you saw all the hats and T-shirts that they were selling, that he's perfect. But these guys don't think his economic plans are all that perfect.
The former president has a set of tariffs that are incredibly sweeping, and the opposite of targeted, on 60%, a 60% tariff on everything from China and 10% on all imports. Now, let's stop calling it a tariff. Let's call it a tax. It is a tax on consumer spending that will hit middle-class families and have exactly the opposite effect on inflation of everything we've talked about so far in this president's agenda. We are working hard to lower costs in prescription drugs and all the areas we've talked about, and Republicans want to repeal those rules, which of course would mean higher prices in the area of health care, in the area of energy, in the area of housing and China and child care, certainly in health care coverage. And then on top of that, add a massive sweeping set of tariffs, which are a sales tax for consumers, highly regressive, hit the middle class hard, and highly inflationary. Even estimates by former members of the Trump team tell us that that will raise inflation.
That's just one economist on a few of Trump's plans, but there's more.
They were talking about the fact that Trump would be a lot more inflationary. Is that how you view Trump 2.0?
Yes, I do. I mean, just think about the policies he's putting forward. And here, of course, I'm assuming that he gets roughly what he wants. But if he does, then it's going to add to inflation. I mean, the tariffs by themselves are going to be quite significant, 10% across the board. He's talked about 60% on Chinese imports into this country. Think about the tax cuts. They're deficit financed. There's no plan for paying for the tax cuts. And he's talking about more tax cuts, lowering the corporate tax rate even more, which will add to deficits. And that's a stimulus, fiscal stimulus, adding to the economy's growth when it's already at full employment. I can go on, but you add that all up, that's a brew for higher rates of inflation.
So while VP Harris hasn't released her full economic plan, which many allies say she needs to get out before Republicans misrepresent it, a large number of economists that Kevin O'Leary apparently hasn't spoken to don't like what they've seen in Trump's. So to avoid that dose of reality, Trump's team seized on a bad day at the stock market and tried to use it for campaign fodder.
Here we go. Look at them go down. What some would call history in the making.
Don't say that. We have never been down 1,000 points ever, not even intraday on the NASDAQ.
Bidenomics is working. It's working.
The stock market just taking a big old nosedive this morning.
Dow Jones is down about 1,010 points.
That is called Bidenomics.
The Dow fell more than 600 points Friday on a weaker than expected jobs report.
5%, Meta 6%, Amazon 6%, Apple 9% down.
Bidenomics is working.
Fears of a recession began after Friday's disappointing July jobs report.
Bidenomics is working.
A rise like that is historically a sign that a recession is imminent.
This is Bidenomics.
What you're seeing right now in the stock market is what Americans have been feeling for the last 3 years. It's just a manifestation of it right now.
All that is called Bidenomics.
That came after stocks took a plunge, which excited Trump enough to post about it too. Of course, there's a massive market turndown. Kamala is even worse than Crooked Joe. Markets will never accept the radical left lunatic that destroyed San Francisco and California as a whole. Next move, the Great Depression of 2024. You can't play games with markets. Kamala crash. But his latest celebration of bad news was just as short as his knowledge about it.
You might have heard the former president referring to what's going on right now as a hurdle toward a depression. Well, if that's the case, the markets had a funny way of showing it, at least today, with the S&P 500 putting in its best single-day performance we've seen in a couple of years, the Dow tracking its biggest gain of the year. But again, these are volatile market conditions.
It must have been part of the reason that Trump called for that disastrous press conference this week, to have something to say since he was suddenly muted on what he hoped would be a nice artificial talking point about the economy. But truth and reality never stopped MAGA Republicans from pushing the same unearned narrative that they've enjoyed when it comes to the economy and the stock market. Just bowl through and claim massive victories, despite what people are seeing and feeling. It's worked for this long, and Trump just might be incompetent and reactionary enough to force more people to see right through it.
Look, I think it is a real problem for these families that having to afford school supplies. And it's just, look, at the end of the day, it's why the economy is going to be one of the most critical election issues this time around. And Kamala Harris, despite the fact that it's putting on a new face and putting her out there.
She's Mamala, not just Kamala.
She's Kamala, which means really bad in Spanish. Then, she's not going to be able to make the case to the American people that things are just better under Biden. That's not, or under Harris. That's not happening.